Yeah. Well, I suppose most artists, certainly my experience began at uni, where less so at the Isle of Man College because it's very much like a classroom situation where you go from one class to another. But certainly when I got to uni, where you're in one space for the majority of a year, it never quite felt like my space because obviously I was surrounded by lots of other people, and in a way that's great because you can bounce ideas off people and they can bounce ideas off you. They can tell you if your work looks crap or it's not working, which is brilliant. So that was probably my first experience of having a space to work. But then when I finished university, I was very lucky. I got a job as artist in residence. And part of that gig was, you had a studio space that was sort of yours, and that felt very much like my space. And I think I kind of made it my space. It got very messy at times. The downside to that. I don't know. Maybe it's not a downside. Side to it is that you're very much on view to the public the whole time. So I got very used to working in front of people, working quickly, not taking certain comments to heart. Because I think most people know that when you're doing a painting, for 2/3 of the time you're working on it, it looks rubbish, it looks crap, and having the public see that is hard when you're starting out. So yeah, that sort of. I think that sort of strengthened me as an artist a little bit, and at the same time I'm an illustrator as well, so people see my finished work in different contexts than most artists do, like stuff I do for The Guardian, which is a lot of the same practice I use as a fine artist, but it ends up in a different place. I don't work very big, so I've never really needed a lot of space. I've obviously, when I was artist in residence, I had a lot of space, but I don't think, in honesty, I really utilised it as well as other artist in residences did. But yeah, so yeah, just a little bit of space is all I need really. I'm quite a messy person, and the great thing about having studio space is you don't really have to clean up that off. Well, you do have to clean up all the time, but you don't really have to worry too much about leaving a mess because nobody's going to see it. Whereas in the gallery, I did have to worry about that a little bit, and the manager used to shout at me about it quite a lot.
Did she?
She did, yeah. She didn't like crisp packets. So yeah, and after I was artist in residence, I rented studio space out in Grenaby, and I suddenly had this great big empty room, and to be honest, I found it extremely intimidating. I found that more intimidating than working in front of the public. And though it was a great space, I found that I didn't do a lot of work there. I did most of my work elsewhere because I found the space too big, too empty, and so I didn't really rent the space for very long. Largely a positive experience. I enjoyed it. But it just wasn't for me, I didn't require that much space. So I learned from that point on, if I have too much space, I get distracted. I start to think of crazy things that just never work. So yeah, and I've always lived in quite small places. So, just to have a dedicated little area, all I really need, aside from the vast amount of computer equipment I now have for the other sides of my work, for when I'm doing fine art, all I really need is a board, some work, just a cup. I don't use a posh palette, I use an old plate, and I just got paint on me again. Yeah, so, and a bit of light, I don't require that much stuff really. Again, I think if I worked big, you can see sort of a bigger piece here in the background, which is, I tend to do these now and again. They don't really go anywhere. I do them when I've got nothing else to do. And to be honest, I probably won't finish it because I don't know why. I just probably won't. But I tend to work smaller. I'm much happier working on, something smaller than A4. Normally, this is sort of my normal size these days, which is half the size of A4. Yeah, so lots of studio space is great if you do great big things or you do lots and lots of small things. But for me, it just freaks me out a little bit. I need to be in a womb almost, sort of compressed into a small space.
Does it help to have your own work on the walls and to feed off your past work?
Yeah, I mean, I find I have to be constantly reminded of what I did before. I'm very conscious that because I try not to do the same exhibition over and over and over, or the same body of work over and over and over, though themes from each show carry on across. I try to make each show or body of work I do look completely different from the last one. So I think it's important to look at that, and from a quality control point of view, is just to make sure whatever I'm doing is, yes, it will hopefully look totally different, but the quality will be there, and hopefully you can still tell it to me. I mean, if I think back to I did very mixed media pieces when I started, and then I did these sort of little, sort of almost comical little pieces of this one character in all these situations, and then I did, I suppose, what you would call proper paintings, and now I'm sort of moving into digital work and trying new things, but hopefully it still translates as my work, you know. So that's why all that's there, is to remind me where I've come from, really.
Right.
You know.
And does it help how like you live alone a lot of the time?
Yeah.
Do you think a partner would have affected your area?
Yeah, I've lived with girlfriends and stuff before. They get pissed off by it, I'll be honest with you. I think a lot of people like the idea of living with an artist. And my current housemate, I'm sure, gets annoyed with the fact that, you know, I'm. It's going to sound really strange. I get up really early. I get up at like 6:30, and I'm not very quiet, and I'm sure it drives her crazy. But yeah, previous partners get annoyed by it, because when I'm sort of in the zone, I'll sit here for 10, 11, 13 hours working straight, and I think people get a bit baffled by it. And I sort of, based on what I said before about being in that open space where you can show people work, I think people do get annoyed, because I do constantly ask, you know, can you tell what this is, or, you know, the other big problem I have is I'm red-green colourblind, and it is a bit of an insecurity sometimes. You know, I try to avoid reds and bold greens. You know, I tend to use sort of a burnt sienna, and I get my greens over mixing deep turquoise and yellow ochre, which gets a really strange sort of green, really, but I can tell it's green. You know, but very occasionally I'll use reds in there just to sort of see what's going on. I am a bit self-conscious about that, so I will constantly ask for advice. So yeah, most people like the idea of living with me, but the practice is not always brilliant.
Right. Yeah, I remember when you were at the gallery, you had your grandfather's colour palette in it, and that is what you still have it there to help you as a guide. And I always was tempted to move them around, but I never did.
I'm very glad you didn't. Well, I wouldn't know if you did, to be honest.
that was. To be honest,
it was very strange back then. I used to use. Yeah, when I started, my use of colour was very. I don't know if you remember. I used to paint everything black, and then paint over the top of it, because I found that colours would come out more vibrant, and I was very about contrast in my work then. And since then, I've sort of refined my palette to sort of these few colours here, really. And I suppose partly it is the colour blindness thing, but partly it's just, you know, I'm very aware that a lot of my early work looked very cold, and I personally, I don't like cold images. So I try and create a warm image. So if I use a blue, I try and somehow make it warm, which quite often makes my colours, as somebody described a couple of weeks ago, quite muddy. But, you know, it's something I'd not really thought of, and then when I look back, I realise actually they are quite muddy, so it's time to move on a little bit.
Do you think that also gives it an identity, the colours?
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
it's
from a distance.
Certainly part of. I think I mean, my hope is if somebody saw my image, they wouldn't need to read who it was by. That's my main. You know, obviously, besides what the image says itself, I would like that somebody could look at one of my artworks and say, "That's Juan Moore." You know, and I know who that is. You know.
I also remember when you first started as an illustrator. you weren't actually creating finished pieces. They were very much scanned, used on a computer and forwarded that way and put into the dustbin, I remember.
Yeah,
until I
know,
picked them out.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
I know. Well, it was fascinating to me that you didn't value the
it's
paintings at that time. Going through uni, and you've been given no direction on that as well.
Well, I think what it was is, you know, I think as you'd agree, when I first started, I was very focused on illustration, to the point where I didn't even consider doing, you know, fine art, and I definitely didn't realise at the time that my practice as an illustrator could be translated to that of a fine artist fairly straightforwardly. But yeah, you know, once the image had done its job, for me, I didn't have any more use for it. You know, I didn't particularly want to. I think also it was quite transient at the time. I didn't really have a place to live when I first started there, and I didn't have anywhere to store anything really. So I used to just throw them away until you decided, actually, you could probably sell these. Why don't you give it a try? And you know, so in a way, I suppose I owe exhibitions all over the world the fact that you pulled my work out of the bin. So
was there a percentage mentioned?
No, there was no percentage mentioned.
Okay. Thought that might be good to get that on film. No.
No. Can't have your pound of flesh.
No. Was there a time when you were doing the paintings before then they were just going to get scanned, that you actually changed because you then became a fine artist and decided to sell them? Did you change your style?
I suppose I became more careful, you know, and weirdly I'm in this weird space at the moment where I am looking back at a lot of my earlier work and sort of looking at it to see what it was I liked about it, what it was people liked it, because I think, you know, I think it's natural that your style and what you do evolves. But I'm at the point where I want to sort of get back to that sort of mindset, you know. I almost had a throwaway attitude to it, you know. I didn't, you know, I still sort of have this mentality that if I can't do it in a day, I'm not going to bother. Though it has gone a little bit. But back then, certainly if I couldn't do it in a day, it wasn't going to get done. You know, that was definitely my mindset on it. I couldn't tell you why my mindset was that way, it just was. But yeah, once I started sort of framing them up and selling them, I became more careful. I've never painted with the mind that I know who's going to buy this, and I definitely don't want to get into that trap. I still paint and create images based on what I want to say, and if somebody likes that's fantastic, that's great. If somebody wants to buy it, that's even better. But yeah, I think I've been quite fortunate in that people sort of get that. I suppose as an illustrator, my work's all about communication, less about expression, more about communication. So I think I've always had this thing that if I could get my point across with an image and a title, it's done. I'm happy, and I still try and maintain that. You know, if I do an image and I have a title with it, and somebody looks at it and going, I don't get it, then for me that image has failed. You know, no matter how pretty it is, no matter how stylized or attractive that image is, it's failed, and you know, I'd scrap it.
You know, like say with a song, is it the lyrics or the music that comes first? Is it the image or the line?
It's an idea. It's always an idea, and I try and, as I'm sort of thumbnailing the image up, trying to make a coherent image with an interesting or just a composition that works. Quite often while I'm working on that, the title will come from that, but it's always based on the idea. So say I quite often I do pieces on the weather. You know, if we have a spate of shitty weather in June, I'll do an image based on that. But I couldn't just call the piece "Shitty Weather in June." I've got to think of something that's going to be more appealing. You know, like a piece I did a piece of a woman walking to work, and she's wearing an old-fashioned diver's helmet because it's raining so hard. You know, and so then the title came from that. I can't remember what the title was now, but it was something clever, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it went down very well. People liked it. So.
Yeah, I find that lots of people do like the line to go with it. I think they do make their own mind up on the image, and then it sort of focuses your sentence focuses.
I think one thing I learned from being an artist in residence is there's such a massive difference, or just, you know, it's something you've got to be very aware of. There's a massive difference from creating the work and then trying to sell the work, you know. And I think it's really important that artists learn how to sell their work and how to present it and almost package it in a way that's going to be appealing for somebody to buy, because it's not an easy thing to do.
No. Would you say the value of being an artist in residence in a large gallery is the communication with the public or the studio space? Which would you say is more important? Did you get out?
It's a bit of both. I mean, it's sort of like seeing behind the curtain a little bit. I definitely rate my year as artist in residence as an extension of my art education, definitely, you know. And I think because I did it straight out of uni, it was so vitally important. I still had the right mindset. I saw how the art world worked, and it sort of prepared me to get my work to the US, to exhibit in the UK, to exhibit in Europe and things like that. And it gave me the confidence. I sort of knew how to, because I was seeing how a gallery was run, I understood how these things work and how to approach these people. But also, the people coming in was interesting, you know, seeing how people view an art exhibition. You know, everybody views it in kind of the same but kind of a different way. You know, everyone will walk the same way around a gallery. You know, like in the gallery I was artist in residence at, everyone turned left. You know, in that current gallery along the prom, they all turn left as well, and you know, they're always wowed by the back wall. There's a way to view a gallery, and once you understand that, I think it makes hanging an exhibition much easier. Having the public see you working is hard. That's something, I think if I did that residency now, it's something I would really struggle with, you know, because I think as you continue through art, you end up with lots and lots of insecurities.
And everyone's a critic.
And everybody's a critic. And the weird thing about art is, like if somebody, it's really strange, you'd never tell somebody who works on a till at Tesco's, oh, you know, you're rubbish at that job.
When you were a child, can you remember where you used to work? Did you always paint as a child?
No, I never painted as a child. I used to draw. I learned to draw, it's going to sound really daft now, I learned to draw with a biro. I went to school I was at primary school in the early 80s, and I don't think art was a priority in as much of a priority as it is now in education. And so I don't remember ever having any formal drawing or painting lessons or anything like that. It was very much viewed as a hobby. So I learned to draw with a biro, and I remember I used to use a chopping board to lean on, and I used to get these, I wish they still made them because they were brilliant, these sketch bags called a Manx Scenic Jotter. They were brilliant, they had a big wodge of paper and like that, and it lasted weeks. So I used to draw for entertainment more than anything else. My granddad always sort of painted in his spare time, and he was always building models and things like that, you know, and he was very creative. And he was always really supportive. I remember drawing with my mum when I was a little kid, but I think at the age of 3 I surpassed her abilities, and so we didn't really do that after that then. All through primary school I remember not getting any support whatsoever with it until I was in my final year at primary school. I remember getting taken out of maths classes to do drawing, which in hindsight was daft. Maths is quite important. I'm not going to say that's why I'm rubbish at maths, but I'm saying it's definitely something to do with it. And then at high school, I used to win the Christmas card competition every year. That was probably about it. I was very much told all through school, you can't make a career at art, you know, forget it. In fact, I remember going, I tell this story all the time, I remember going to see the careers officer. As you had to, it was mandatory. And him saying, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, you know, I'd love to draw or paint or do something like that. And I remember him looking at the computer, or I don't think it was a computer then, maybe just a file, and him looking back at me and saying, have you ever thought about joining the army? And so I left school at 16 and just had loads of really bad jobs until I had a bit of an epiphany and sort of because I always drew in my spare time, and sort of I took up painting when I was about 21. Just sort of something to do, really. I really enjoyed it, and I thought, you know what, I'm tired of working for assholes in kitchens and Hitlers in bars and things like that. So I thought, so I'm just going to try and make a go of it. And so I signed up to the Iron Man College. I had been to college briefly when I was 16, but I didn't last very long. I just wasn't very disciplined, or I had a real attitude problem when I was 16. But so I everything I've done has just been for, certainly up until about the age of 21, I used to do it for entertainment, I used to do it to amuse myself. I used to always, it was whatever drawing I did, it was always telling a story, or expressing a silly idea, or making fun of bullies at school, because obviously I'm quite little. I got picked on quite a lot for that. So the only thing I had, I could never really fight back. Well, I did, but it never ended very well. So I used to just draw horrible pictures of bullies, and more than once it saved me an ass kicking. So.
And then would you put your little comment at the side as well? Were you always doing that as well?
No, you see, I can't spell to save my life.
Right.
As I'm sure you well know, because the amount of posters I've done for you that have had massive typos in them. So I used to always avoid the comments. I'd always think them, but I'd try and sell the whole insult or whatever it was I was trying to do in the image. So the comments came much later.
Yeah. So that obviously makes it much harder, doesn't it, to get that over?
Absolutely, but as an illustrator, the golden rule of illustration is you can't write in your artwork, so you've always got to try and sell whatever it is your work's working with that. So I suppose it's something, I suppose I do it quite. I try to do it quite naturally. Try to do something naturally. It's weird, isn't it? But
were your parents supportive of your art ambitions?
They never said don't do it, but they never said go for it. It's all you do it. So I suppose they were quite indifferent to the whole thing. I think they just, like any parents really, they just want you to be happy. I think my dad struggles with the idea of how I make a living. Because next year I've been doing this for 10 years. It's just crazy. So yeah, I think some people struggle. I think I struggle with the idea. I don't always know where the next paycheck's coming from, but I know it's out there somewhere.
Yeah. Do you think it might be their lack of knowledge of the art world that maybe why they weren't exactly against you? They just didn't have anything to add.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of people think that art's a bit of a dodge, a bit of a skive. And I think because people do a lot of it for a hobby, I think it can be thought of that way, but it's actually really tough to. I mean yourself. It is tough to make a living at, and it's something. It's really strange. It doesn't get easier. I very much for years when I started, I thought it's going to get easier. I'm not going to be chasing the next job or, begging galleries for exhibitions and things like that. But nearly 10 years later, I still am. So. And most people I know who work in this sort of line of work are exactly the same. You're always chasing the next paycheck. And I think that's definitely something that Joe nobody on the street doesn't really understand. They think, it must be great, you can paint for a living. And it's like, yeah, so some days it's great.
Yeah. So your the affordability of your space. Does that impact on your work? Would that impact on your work?
I think one of the things I learned when I was down in Grenaby, and those were subsidised studios, and I didn't pay a lot for it. It was I very much felt obligated to use the space because I was paying for it. To be honest, I wasn't suited to the space, I suppose, rather than the space being suited for me. And so I have always had this thing in the back of my head, if ever I was going to rent studio space again, I would be very careful about how and why I was going to do that. Right now, because I don't do anything very big, I do live, essentially work in this little space. I spend most of my time in this little space. It's all I need, really. So unless I was working, obviously other things, like I've worked on animations and things like that, and obviously you need a dedicated studio space for that. On Chico and Rita we used a disused office, and that worked fine. The show I did for Manx National Heritage a couple of years ago, there was at one point 5 or 6 of us working on that, and we just took over one of their seminar rooms and we filled the walls with the storyboards and the concept work, and that's how it went, really.
There is a theory that having to pay for a studio helps the discipline of you working, and you were saying you were obligated to go because you were paying for it.
Yeah.
Do you think that could help artists, not necessarily yourself?
I think definitely artists starting out. When you're starting out, discipline is tough, because particularly if you've come from university, you've had 3 years where you've had to do something because you've had a deadline, and you suddenly get thrown into this world where you don't have deadlines. You can do what you want, in theory. I must admit, discipline's never really been an issue for me. I'm quite lucky in that way, and I think partly it's because before I went into it, I had a lot of really shit jobs, basically. I used to work on the boats, and that was a very disciplined environment. So a lot of the bullshit of my youth got knocked out of me then, so which is definitely a good thing. So I'm quite focused on what I'm doing. I think also working in illustration is very much, you always have a deadline. It could be 6 months away, but you still have a deadline. And I think it's hard sometimes. I mean, sometimes I struggle with the fine art aspect of my work, because I don't really have deadlines for that. I mean, I tend to set myself these projects, like what I'm doing with the Arts Council at the moment, I don't do a bunch of work and then try and get an exhibition for it. I get an exhibition and then I do the work for it. So I've always got that deadline, and that's just how I work. That's how my brain works. I'm in complete awe of people who can just go in, do work for the sake of it, might not go anywhere, and that baffles me. It's amazing. Don't get me wrong, it is amazing, but yeah. Do
you think that discipline of you? I know you're going back to when you said it took me a day, and I wasn't interested if it took me more than a day. Do you think that helped with your contracts that you keep getting with the Guardian, who quite often work on very tight? I remember at the beginning they were very tight deadlines.
Yeah, they're still pretty tight. It was interesting when I first started with Guardian. I remember the first gig I got with them was because another illustrator had let them down, and they had a day to get something done, and I did it, and they were happy with it. And then a couple of weeks later, they said, we kind of forgot about this particular project, can you do it in a day? And that was kind of thing. And I think one point, I think the one job that cemented me in their mind was, I was in the middle of moving house. It was right at the end of 2007. And the lovely Pauline at the Guardian phoned me up in a panic, and she's a lovely Irish lady, and she's great. She still works there, she's brilliant, but she phoned me up and said, June, I'm in a real pickle, you've got to help me out of this. I went, all right, well, I don't have a scanner, I don't have anywhere to paint, my whole life's in boxes, but if I can help you out, I will. She goes, I've just got this thing, we've got an hour before we go to press, and we've been let down by somebody, and can you do it? And I looked at it, and it was an article about a mobile phone, and I thought, God, it was a really dull article, to be honest. It was just talking about the advantages, but the phone was called a Goldfish, and I thought, right, that's my in. And bizarrely, I don't know why, but fish appear in my work all the time. They just do. And I had all these bits of paintings of fish on my computer, so I cobbled them all together and sort of put a man stood on a fish with a crude mobile phone thing. And I sent it off and said, will that do? And she goes, you're a lifesaver, it's brilliant. And I remember getting an email from the editor of the Weekend magazine at the time saying, thank you, really got us out of a hole. And from then on, they've always hired me. I mean, I do get a bit longer now. Sometimes I get 2 days these days. So the one I did, which my computer's gone off, I think. This one, I had 2 days to do that. But still, I never take that long. But yeah. So.
I do know. I've watched
it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's not a race or anything like that. It's just the way I work. I work fast. And I kind of think you can overcook an image. And I definitely think I've done images that were overcooked, and I see lots of student work and actually a lot of practicing artist work that I feel are a bit overdone. So it's knowing that point to walk away. And I think, when I do things in a day, it's still got that element of drama to it because the brush strokes are quick, or the pose is not as thought out as perhaps it should be. So it's got that sense of frenetic energy to it, which is something I go for quite a lot. And part maybe that is because I only spend a day on it.
I've seen some of your bigger works where you have done quite a lot of different ideas within that painting. Is that one way that you do the bigger ones?
I don't do them very often, and I still don't think they're very successful. So maybe that's something to work on.
I disagree. I think they went down very well. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Right, what are barriers for an artist at the moment currently working?
Barriers.
And facilitators. Who helps you and who helps
Barriers,
you?
big ones, the internet. It sounds weird because it's a great facilitator as well, but it's a massive barrier. I mean, you put something out there and it's so easy for it to get copied or ripped off. There's an illustrator friend of mine called Gemma Corral, and she's very well known. You've probably seen her. She does a lot of work with pugs. You've probably seen the t-shirt "Pugs Not Drugs" t-shirt. She designed that, and she does really well out of all that kind of thing. But her agent spends most of their time sending out cease and desist letters for companies ripping her off. I've had my work ripped off on t-shirts. I remember walking around Camden Market a few years ago and seeing one of those ones on a t-shirt and having to say, what? So that's a problem. Living on the island, I think there's a very vibrant creative community over here. There's more places to show your work as an artist than there's ever been in my knowledge to the island. I mean, you've got Studio 42, obviously. Noah's Bakehouse are doing art shows now. I don't know what that's like for selling, but the shows always look very good. The Arts Council are doing a lot more with visual arts than I think they have in a very, very long time. Manx National Heritage are showing some stuff down in Peel now. So, there's lots of opportunities. And I think there's a lot of help available now as well. The Arts Council are very, very helpful. I know several artists recently who've gotten some help from them. And Manx National Heritage always open to ideas over here. And I think we're on the cusp of globally. In the art world, I think we're on the cusp of a boom. I can just have that feeling, just the way things are going in the UK and the US. I think things are gonna pick up massively because we've been in a bit of a slump for the past couple of years. So hopefully it's gonna get better.
What are the disadvantages of being on the island, Riley?
What are the disadvantages?
Yeah.
Getting your work off the island is an obvious one. There are ways and means. I think it's something each artist has to do by themselves to find out what's best for them. The way I deal with it is I deal with framers who are close to galleries where I show work and I send the work to them, so I don't have to crate a load of stuff up or hire a van and go to wherever. That's the only one I can think of, really. I mean, with the internet, getting your stuff to people is no longer a bigger issue as it used to be.
What about networking? Can you network on the internet, or is it not the same?
Not really. I think when I started, I used to go to London quite a lot, and just go around, see potential clients, see galleries, endlessly mail stuff off. I mean, I think. Maybe I shouldn't say this because I think the only reason galleries pay attention to me is because I mail stuff off rather than email. I'm very aware that it's very easy to get an email, see it's from a prospective artist and just delete it without opening it, or if you're really unlucky, go straight to the junk mail filter. I think if you send something in regular post, at least somebody there is going to open it. Nobody throws away a handwritten letter. Nobody. They have to at least open it. So
yeah, I'd agree.
That's the advice I would give. But it's hard no matter where you live. Is it harder living on the Isle of Man? Well, I don't think so. It requires more effort, but I don't think it's any more difficult. I think if you work in film and animation, it becomes a bit more difficult. It's such a highly populated industry that you really do have to go down to London or a city where this kind of thing happens and really float your name out there.